Dear friends, following the hell of the Holocaust, countries came together. They created the United Nations and our Charter 8 years ago, affirming the worth of every human person. They adopted the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, for which we owe a debt of gratitude to the Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin. And they established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the foundation of all international human rights law. As one of the drafters, Lebanese diplomat and intellectual Charles Malik said, the declaration was, and I quote, inspired by opposition to the barbarous doctrines of Nazism and fascism, end of quote. The dignity of every member of our human family is enshrined in that document, which draws from traditions around the world. It is a pure expression of our shared humanity. And in dark times, it remains a shining light. Dear friends, today our world is fractured and dangerous. 80 years since the Holocaust end, anti-Semitism is still with us, fueled by the same lies and loathing that made the Nazi genocide possible. And it is rising. Discrimination is rife. Hatred is being stirred up across the globe. One of the clearest and most troubling examples is the spreading cancer of Holocaust denial. Undisputable historical facts are being distorted, diminished, and dismissed. And efforts are being made to recast and rehabilitate Nazis and their collaborators. We must stand up to these outrages. We must promote education, combat lies, and speak the truth. And we must condemn anti-Semitism wherever and whenever it appears. And we must condemn all forms of racism, prejudice, and religious bigotry which we see proliferating today. Because we know these evils wither our morality, corrode our compassion, and seek to blind us to suffering, opening the door to atrocities. The United Nations has long worked to combat anti-Semitism through a wide range of activities, including our Holocaust outreach programs. And we recently launched our action plan on anti-Semitism, recommending the ways the United Nations system can further enhance those efforts. In these days of division, it is all the more important that we hold fast to our common humanity and renew our resolve to defend the dignity and human rights of all. Every one of us has a duty. The history of the Holocaust shows us what can happen when people choose not to see and not to act. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights prescribes that every individual and every organ of society shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms. Each of us must answer the call, denounce lies, resist hate, and ensure our common humanity overcomes division. These causes are at the very core of the United Nations. We will never forget, and we will never waver in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General Guterres. And it is my honor now to invite His Excellency, Mr. Philemon Young, President of the 79th session of the General Assembly, to deliver remarks. Your Excellency.
Your Excellency, Isaac Herzog, President of the State of Israel, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you to this occasion. We gather here today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day to solemnly commemorate one of the darkest chapters in human history. This year is particularly significant, marking 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, a name etched in our collective memory as a symbol of unimaginable cruelty, brutality that can never be forgotten. It also marks 80 years since the end of the World War, Second World War, and the founding of the United Nations. This organization was created to prevent such atrocities and to build a world where human rights are upheld and all people live with dignity and peace. Today we honor the memory of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, as well as the Roma, the Sinti, and countless other groups of people who perished in the Holocaust. Some survivors of this atrocity are here with us today. Mr. Dumitru Miklescu, Ms. Marian Moller, and Ms. Ginger Lane. Their courage in standing before us, even as they confront reminders of the unimaginable brutality they endured, commands our deepest respect. They are living witnesses to the catastrophic consequences of unchecked hatred and barbarism. The preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, forged in the aftermath of this tragedy, reminds us, and I quote, "Disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind," end of quote. Similarly, it was our shared revulsion at the crime of genocide that led to the adoption of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, a solemn commitment by the global community to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. The moral imperative before us is clear. We must build a future where our commitment to human dignity is absolute and uncompromising. Indeed, as President of the General Assembly, I hold the respect for human dignity as one of my core principles. Throughout the 79th session, I remain committed to supporting efforts to build a future grounded in peace, security, justice, and equality for all. Central to this objective is education and vigilance against all forms of prejudice and hate, including anti-Semitism. It is equally our responsibility to guard against historical distortions such as Holocaust denial, to ignore the overwhelming evidence of this brutal chapter in human history, from gas chambers to the testimonies of survivors and even perpetrators, is to risk repeating such atrocities. We must never forget that the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers. It began in the minds of human beings, fueled by hate speech, propaganda, and systemic discrimination. It was the devastating result of allowing hatred and dehumanization to take root, fueled by indifference and apathy. It should alarm us deeply that today we are witnessing a resurgence of hate speech anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and discrimination in all its forms across many parts of the world. Equally alarming is the number of armed conflicts in parts of the world which have been marked by inhuman brutality, massive killings of innocent civilians, including women and children, and an utter disregard for international law, including international humanitarian law. Such practices in war should not be tolerated and are warning signs that we are treading a dark and familiar path, the very path we swore to abandon with the solemn promise of never again. Never again. I reiterate that education and raising awareness about these atrocities remains our most powerful instrument against the tide of hatred. By fostering education, raising awareness, and promoting critical thinking and empathy, we equip future generations to recognize and reject the seeds of intolerance before they take root. The survivors of the Holocaust, with their courage and willingness to recount the unimaginable suffering they endured, play an indispensable role in this effort. In fact, no person can conquer the human spirit. Survivors remind us not only of the horrors they experienced, but also of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of preserving memory as a shield against future crimes and genocides. We all share a global responsibility to build a culture of peace, tolerance, respect, and mutual understanding. In memory of those who perished and in honor of those who survived, we must commit ourselves to creating a world where human dignity is cherished, a world where equality and justice prevail, and where the lessons of the past guide us toward a brighter, freer, and more just future for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly. I would now like to invite His Excellency, Mr. Isaac Herzog, President of the State of Israel, to deliver remarks.
Near my heart, I wear a yellow pin, a pin that symbolizes anticipation, hope, and a resounding cry for all humanity. Bring back our tortured children and elderly, our women and men, from the tunnels of terror in Gaza home to Israel. We call it the hostages pin. On the massacre of October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists attacked our people. They murdered, raped, and mutilated women, tortured, beheaded, and burnt innocent people and entire families, and kidnapped hundreds of them, men, women, and children. Amongst our sisters and brothers kidnapped was Omer Nutra, an Israeli and American citizen whose fate was unknown for well over a year. Omer's great-grandfather, Yosef Nutra, was a Holocaust survivor and a freedom fighter who survived the Shoah, the Holocaust, carrying just a few coins in his pocket. Louise, Omer's aunt, took her grandfather Yosef's coins and fashioned them into the yellow ribbon hostages symbol, surrounded by barbed wire. The coins that survived humanity's darkest hours became the canvas for creating a pin that symbolizes the story of a nation, a symbol of survival, a symbol of faith, a symbol of hope, a symbol of longing, a symbol of remembrance, a symbol of outcry, the outcry of so many generations calling for justice, for humanity. Omer's parents, Orna and Ronen Nutra, are here with us today. Like Ronen, Orna also comes from a family of Holocaust survivors. Her father, Simcha, is a living testimony to this day. For over 400 days, Ronen wore the pin on his lapel, hoping and praying for his son's return. A few weeks ago, the Nutra family received the devastating news. Captain Omer Nutra fell heroically in the Battle of October 7th. His body is being held by murderous terrorists in Gaza. I stand before you as president of a nation that is determined and proud, and yet anguished and incomplete. Although the Israeli people have been overcome with emotion, seeing 7 of our daughters at last emerge heroically from hell, still 90 Israelis and foreign nationals remain in Hamas captivity. We are anxiously waiting 6 more to be freed this week and awaiting all others. I call on all representatives in this General Assembly, all who consider themselves part of the civilized world, to throw your weight to ensure our hostages return to their homes, every single one of them. Bring them back home now. In one of the darkest days of the Holocaust, November 3rd, 1943, Rabbi Klonimus Kalman Shapira, the Rebbe of Piasetzno, was murdered by the Nazis in the massacre known as the Aktion Ernteffest. Shortly before his death, the Rebbe composed a special prayer for his people, for our people, the Jews, who were at the hands of the murderers, the Nazis, and their accomplices. Here at the United Nations General Assembly, as President of the Jewish Democratic State of Israel, I wish to recite this prayer for the urgent return of all our sisters and brothers who are held in brutal captivity by murderous terrorists. The hostages are enduring subhuman conditions without essential primary health care, without Red Cross visitations, without any compliance with international law, treaties, or agreements. I will first recite the prayer in our holy language, our people's language in Hebrew, followed by English. ריבונו של עולם, האזינה לכל בחיינו ולענקת ליבנו. ראה את צערנו ועוניינו, והושיענו ממצוקתנו הגדולה. קרובי נפשנו, נשים וילדים, אבות ואימהות, אחים ואחיות, ושאר אחינו בני ישראל, נעקרו מתוכנו, הם לוקחו בשבי, ועקבותיהם לא נודעו. היה נא אתה, אל שדי, מגינם של כל השבויים, שמור עליהם מכל צרה וצוקה. תן להם כוח לעמוד בעינויים, ואמצא להם חיות, למען יזכו לשוב אל משפחותיהם. Amen. God Almighty, listen to the voice of our weeping and the sigh of our hearts. Our loved ones, women and children, fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, have been torn from our midst. Be you, Almighty God, the guardian of all the captives. Protect them from all trouble and distress. Give them strength to endure torment and grant them life, so they may merit return to their families. Amen. Dearest Holocaust survivors, United Nations Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres, thank you for this meaningful invitation. President of this session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Philemon Young, Permanent Representative of Israel to the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Dani Danon, and distinguished permanent representatives, ladies and gentlemen. Precisely 80 years ago today, on January 27, 1945, the gates of hell opened, collapsed. Auschwitz, the largest and most vicious death factory in human history, was liberated by the Soviet Union Red Army. In many other death camps, the horror continued for months until they were liberated by the Allied forces, the Red Army, the American Army, the British Army, and the heroic armies of many other nations. 6 million Jews, 1/3 of the Jewish people at the time, were systematically slaughtered by the Nazis and their collaborators. It was history's most monstrous, sadistic, premeditated, and meticulously executed mass murder. Murder in gas chambers, in crematoriums, in ghettos, in death valleys, in death marches, in death camps, in the darkest, most abhorrent chapter in human history. Shmuel Gogol was born in Poland in 1924. After arriving at the Warsaw orphanage run by the great Polish Jewish educator Janusz Korczak, Shmuel was given a small harmonica as a gift. When he was taken to Auschwitz, he took the harmonica with him, but it was confiscated immediately upon arrival. When Shmuel discovered that another prisoner had a harmonica, he gave up his bread rations to hold the instrument once again. And so, in the heart of darkness, between the cracks of fear and despair, the melody of an orphaned Jewish child's soul burst out, a melody that would not allow hope to fade. One day, a Nazi guard heard the melody of the harmonica. He ordered Shmuel to participate in the Auschwitz Death Orchestra, to play music while Jews were marched to their horrific death in the gas chambers. When my cousins marched to their death in front of me, Gogol recounted, I closed my eyes and said, enough, I cannot look anymore. There in those moments, he vowed, if he survived, he would dedicate his life to teaching music to children. From the darkest and cruelest of hours emerged a message of hope and determination to revive the melody of life. Shmuel immigrated to Israel and taught harmonica for many years. He returned to Auschwitz in 1990 on an emotional journey alongside pupils from the harmonica orchestra he established in Israel, and played there for the first time with his eyes open. There is a well-known Hebrew phrase, את המנגינה הזאת אי אפשר להפסיק. This melody cannot be stopped. The wail of the harmonica, the melody Gogol played in the Holocaust, became the melody of Jewish rebirth and survival. The sound of horror, grief, and death became, through the courage of many, including the survivors of the Holocaust, sounds of building, of life, of faith, of hope, the sounds of the State of Israel. Sounds of eyes wide open of a nation rising from dust and devastation, a nation continuing to live with all its beauty and strength, the nation of Israel. Tragically, in November 2023, just a few weeks after the October 7th massacre, Shmuel Gogol's great-grandson, IDF Captain Asaf Mastel, fell in a heroic battle in the Gaza Strip. He died defending Israeli citizens of all faiths and beliefs and fighting against terror in its darkest and most barbaric form. The story of heroism, the story of fighting to live, of justice and humanity, of the eternity of the Jewish people, carries on from generation to generation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Holocaust was the single most catastrophic disaster in the history of our people and the history of all humanity. Yet, from this unthinkable wreckage emerged a voice resounding throughout the family of nations, a voice calling for repair, healing, and building together, a voice that led to the founding of the United Nations and the international courts, and to the establishment of the State of Israel, an act supported by the family of nations, an act of historical justice. I am privileged that a relative of mine took part in these foundational processes. Sir Hirsch Lauterpacht, the uncle of my mother Ora, was a proud Jew whose family perished in the Holocaust. He served on the team that prosecuted the Nuremberg trials against Nazi leaders and officials who plotted and executed the greatest genocide in the history of humankind, the genocide of the Jewish people, the Shoah. Professor Lauterpacht helped establish the International Court of Justice, later serving on its bench as a judge. The man who saw with his very own eyes in the Nuremberg courtroom the cruelest of human beings, the Nazis who annihilated his family and sought to erase his people, this man was also the one who first formulated the legal definition of crimes against humanity. He did so out of deep faith and hope that the international institutions will forever be committed to preventing these heinous crimes from ever happening again to the Jewish people or any other people, and committed to delivering justice for the sake of all humanity. However, this moral and ethical lighthouse has been eroded time and time again. I recall such a moral lapse in November of 1975, when the United Nations General Assembly despicably declared the Jewish people's national movement, Zionism, a form of racism. I recall how 50 years ago, right here at this very podium, stood my late father, Chaim Herzog, as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. He would later become the 6th president of Israel. My father served as a British officer in World War II, liberating and rescuing Jews from Nazi death camps, including Bergen-Belsen. He stood here on the memorial night of Kristallnacht, in which Nazi stormtroopers attacked Jewish communities, burned 1,500 synagogues, murdered and jailed thousands of Jews throughout the Nazis' Third Reich. As he delivered his monumental speech advocating for the entire Jewish people, my father tore up UN Resolution 3379, calling out the hatred, ignorance, and lies that enabled such a disgrace. It took 16 years for this assembly to revoke that shameful resolution. Today, we find ourselves yet again at a dangerous crossroads in the history of this institution. Rather than fulfilling its purpose and fighting courageously against a global epidemic of jihadist, murderous, and abhorrent terror, Time and again, this assembly has exhibited moral bankruptcy. International forums and institutions, such as the International Criminal Court, opt for outrageous hypocrisy and protection of the perpetrators of the atrocities. They blur the distinction. They blur the distinction between good and evil, creating a distorted symmetry between the victim and the murderous monster. I ask you, how is this possible? How is it possible that international institutions, which began as an anti-Nazi alliance, are allowing anti-Semitic genocidal doctrines to flourish uninterrupted in the wake of the largest massacre of Jews since World War II? How is it possible that the moral compass of so many in the family of nations has become so disoriented that they no longer recognize the clear truth that just as terrorists use civilians as human shields, they also weaponize the international institutions, undermining the most basic fundamental reason for their establishment? How is it possible that the same institutions established in the wake of the greatest genocide in history, the Holocaust, are manipulating the definition of genocide for the sole purpose of attacking Israel and the Jewish people, doing so by embracing the despicable phenomena of Holocaust inversion? I want to be clear. We know for a fact, based on evidence, that the October 7th terrorists drew inspiration from Hitler and the Nazis and acted with all their cruelty to destroy our nation of Israel and its citizens. But the issue, ladies and gentlemen, is much deeper and reaches far beyond the October 7th massacre. We have all witnessed a huge volcano of anti-Semitism erupt following the massacre. This alarming reality was also reflected in the important report the United Nations just published about anti-Semitism. This is an urgent wake-up call to all humanity. Anti-Semitism, savagery, cruelty, and racism are still thriving on our planet. They are thriving because far too many states represented here do not confront them, do not unanimously condemn them, do not fight against them. Even more outrageous is a UN member state, Iran, explicitly scheming and acting to destroy a fellow UN member state, the State of Israel. Iran's fanatical leadership turned its country into a hub of anti-Semitism, hatred, and terror. It is developing weapons of mass destruction aimed at annihilating the only and one and only national home of the Jewish people, born out of the ashes of the Holocaust. The world cannot continue turning a blind eye to the global threat posed by Iran, both directly and through its proxies, and to the danger represented by jihadist terrorism. Enabling realization of these threats signals to past generations that we failed to learn the lessons of history, and signals to future generations that our battles will soon become theirs. This is a moment of truth for us all. We either bow our heads or unite and take action to halt the danger. Now we must, all of us, fight together, shoulder to shoulder and with all our might, against anti-Semitism, terror, and hatred. We must fight against the misuse of international institutions as a vehicle, threatening the very existence and right to self-defense of the nation-state of the Jewish people, the State of Israel. Under no circumstances will we accept, ever, any challenge to the Jewish people's legitimate right to self-determination in our land, in the State of Israel. It is time to acknowledge challenging our right to exist is not diplomacy, it is plain anti-Semitism. 80 years after the Holocaust, I stand here with deep faith and hope. Our nation rose from the flames of the crematorium, not to live forever by the sword, but to build, to repair, to add light, to heal. We have stood strong against our enemies' assaults, and we have always done so, and we do so today, in full compliance with international law and humanitarian norms. And no less important, we have forged alliances and peace treaties that have transformed the Middle East, and I pray for the day we will achieve peace with more and more nations in our region, and that all peoples of the Middle East, Israelis, Palestinians, and all others will live peacefully side by side. From the ashes of Auschwitz, we built a resilient, diverse, democratic society composed of a magnificent mosaic of Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Circassians, and peoples of many faiths and lifestyles. And we have contributed to humanity in countless fields. In Israel's Declaration of Independence, along with extending our hands for peace, we have committed our nation to the values of liberty, equality, and justice in faithful adherence to the principle of the Charter of the United Nations. This is because we believe in the power of partnership, particularly partnership between nations and peoples, to heal and build, a partnership which we belong to by merit and not by anyone's grace. On this historic day, we must commit to joining hands to defeat darkness and hatred and work together to ensure building of a shared future. This is the vow we must share, all of us, the family of nations, that what happened once will never happen again. Ladies and gentlemen, 94-year-old Eva Arben defeated death 3 times. As a child in the Theresienstadt ghetto, as a young girl who marched in the horrific death march in Auschwitz, and this year as a citizen of Israel, under a barrage of thousands of rockets from Gaza to Israel on her city, Ashkelon. This terror attack took her back 80 years. But Eva refused to leave her home. As she said to me just a few days ago, articulating profound words of faith, and I quote, "If I knew that tomorrow was the end of the world, I would plant a tree today. I would plant it with tears, but I would plant it and plant a tree." In the spirit of Eva, in the spirit of all heroic Holocaust survivors, including those who are with us today, we will remember the past, hold onto life, and never give up. We will continue planting tree after tree, today and tomorrow, trees of life, of future, of hope. Trees that symbolize fervent faith in the human spirit, triumphing over darkness in spite of it all. I know the journey may be long, but I'm full of hope. Hope about us, about our partnership, and about the days yet to come. May the memory of our sisters and brothers murdered in the Holocaust be blessed and engraved upon the heart of all humanity for eternity. Am Israel Chai.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would now like to invite Her Excellency, Ambassador Dorothy Shea, Charge d'Affaires ad interim of the United States to the United Nations, to deliver her remarks.
Thank you to all the survivors and family members present today, including Ms. Ginger Lane, Mr. Dumitru Muklescu, and Ms. Marianne Muller. It is a true privilege to be here with you. Thank you for sharing your stories of persecution, but also of perseverance. It's one thing to read about the Holocaust in a book. It's another thing to hear about it from someone who lived it. That human connection really makes a difference. It deepens our understanding of the darkest moments in human history on a personal level. And it strengthens our resolve to live up to the sacred promise, never again. So thank you all. I also want to thank Secretary General Guterres, President Yang, Undersecretary Fleming, and all of those esteemed representatives and guests who are with us today to commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The theme of this gathering, Holocaust Remembrance for Dignity and Human Rights, serves as a reminder of how hatred, dehumanization, and apathy can lead to genocide. And it underscores the importance of calls for collective action to prevent the spread of hatred and denial of the Holocaust. 2025, as we have heard, marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II and the liberation of the Nazi concentration and death camps that were some of the main sites of the genocide of 6 million Jews, known as the Holocaust. The United Nations General Assembly designated January 27th the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1945 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day, a time to remember the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution. We are here today to recognize the importance of commemorating this day and the extraordinary courage of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. For survivors of the Holocaust, returning to a dignified life was vital. Every day we have a moral obligation to honor that struggle, to honor the victims, learn from the survivors, and carry forth the lessons of the century's most heinous crime. We are continually and painfully reminded that hate doesn't go away, it only hides. And it falls to each of us to speak out against the resurgence of anti-Semitism and ensure that bigotry and hate receive no safe harbor. At home and around the world, we must promote dignity and human rights in the face of the continuing scourge of anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, today we see the rise of anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred globally. Holocaust denial and distortion are also on the rise. They are a form of anti-Semitism and are often coupled with xenophobia. History shows, as hatred directed at Jews rises, violence and attacks on the foundations of democracy are not far behind. It is vital that we confront this problem at this moment. The Anti-Defamation League, ADL, recently released Global 100 survey highlights, which highlight significant trends and areas of concern regarding anti-Semitic attributes worldwide. It was conducted in 103 countries and territories. According to this survey, 46% of adults harbor elevated levels of anti-Semitic sentiment. This represents an estimated 2.2 billion people worldwide, marking the highest level since the ADL began tracking these trends over a decade ago. The data also highlights a troubling increase in anti-Semitic attitudes among younger demographics, with significant implications for future societal dynamics. Holocaust distortion is now 13 percentage points more prevalent than Holocaust denialism. Although the survey has no specific data on the exact cause of this, ADL experts believe that social media and new malicious variations of mis- and disinformation are playing a major role in Holocaust distortion. Despite these alarming statistics, the results also show global acknowledgement of anti-Semitism as a pressing issue, with the majority recognizing it as a serious problem. This presents a crucial opportunity for governmental action and policy intervention to combat these biases effectively. We urge the endorsement and implementation of the global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism, already embraced by scores of nations and organizations, as an essential step toward mitigating the scourge of global anti-Semitism. The United States also embraces the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, inclusive of its examples. As a founding member of the 35-member International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, we encourage the IHRA's recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust. The challenge now lies in putting these guidelines into practice. The UN must demonstrate its full commitment to its human rights mandate and take concrete steps that will lead to tangible progress. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can stamp out hate. Atrocities like the Holocaust don't just happen. They are allowed to happen. It is up to us to stop them. Never again. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shea. Dear friends, how do the children and grandchildren of survivors respond to the legacy of the Holocaust? Noor Ben Shalom, a third-generation survivor, founded the project Lebensmelodien, or Life Melodies, in response to a letter from his great-aunt, Salomea Ochs-Luft. She was a Jewish pianist, and she wrote to her family shortly before she was deported in 1943. In her letter, Salomea described the terrible persecution of the Jews. Knowing that she would not survive the Holocaust, she begged her relatives to avenge her death. Noor Ben Shalom struggled to respond to this plea. Then he realized he could honor Salomea's call as a musician. He would make known the music that gave comfort to Jewish people in the face of approaching death. The Lebensmelodien Project ensemble comprises renowned classical musicians. A well-known actor is invited to narrate the story of each piece. And today we're pleased to have the award-winning actor, Ms. Tova Feldschuh, join the Lebensmelodien Project ensemble as the narrator. We invite her now to open the first presentation by the Lebensmelodien Project Ensemble, Chad Gadya, composed by Shmuel Blaz. Thank you, Ms. Feldschuh, and the Lebensmelodien Project.
Chad Gadya, composed by Shmuel Blaz. Shmuel Blaz served as the chief cantor of the great Eger Synagogue in Eger, Hungary. He and his wife, Rivka Blaz, were known for their warm hospitality, welcoming travelers of all backgrounds, regardless of color or religion, to their Shabbat table. But even the city's bishop was a regular guest and often requested that Shmuel compose musical pieces for his church services at the Basilica of Eger. When the Nazis occupied Hungary, They desecrated the Egar synagogue, converting it into a horse stable. The Blush family was forcibly sent to the ghetto and later deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau on June the 8th, 1944. From their large and their close-knit family, only 5 of their children survived the Holocaust and later immigrated to the United States of America and to Israel, and happily, many of them are here today. During the war, Shmuel Blush was drafted into the Hungarian labor service, and at the same time, a young man in his 30s, Shmuel Lazarovich, was also drafted into the Hungarian labor service. And these 2 men ended up working side by side. Shmuel Blush taught his new friend, Lazarovich, an original composition of his, a Hungarian version of the song, Had Gadya, Had Gadya, a famous tune from the Haggadah sung at the Passover Seder. One of these 2 Shmuels jotted down the melodic line on a piece of paper, thereby preserving Blush's melody. When Lazarovich briefly returned to his village of Hedges on leave, he left the page in a side cabinet in his home. In March of 1944, the German army invaded Hungary, and many Hungarian Jews, of course, perished, including Shmuel Blush. Lazarovich himself was deported to Dachau. But in 1945, after the war, Lazarovich returned to Hedges, where the villagers joyfully welcomed him. He rushed to discover the fate of his home. The wooden cabinet in which he had left various ritual objects had remained intact, and also in that cabinet was a Passover Haggadah with a yellowed piece of paper inserted humbly between its pages. It was the Hungarian version of Had Gadya, composed by his friend Shmuel Blush.
Thank you, Ms. Feldschuh, and the Lebensmelodien Project Ensemble. That was beautiful. We acknowledge also the family of Shmuel Elblas, who are with us today. Dear friends, the Roma suffered greatly during the Holocaust. The Nazis murdered a quarter of Europe's Roma and Sinti population. The same prejudice that fueled the Nazis' discrimination and violence persisted after the Holocaust ended, and shamefully, it took decades before the devastating impact of Nazi rule on the Roma communities was officially recognized. Denial and distortion of historical facts continues. Listening to the stories of survivors counters this, and we're honored to invite Mr. Dumitru Muklescu, who, at the age of 91, has flown from Bucharest, Hungary, to be with us today. He is supported by his great niece, Ms. Isabel Taibieraj. Thank you very much, Mr. Muklescu.
Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to stand before you today. To speak here at the United Nations is something I never imagined I would do. I'm here not just for myself, but for all the Roma who suffered during the Holocaust and did not have the chance to be heard. My name is Dumitru Muklescu. I am from Romania, from the city of Craiova. I am Roma and I am a survivor of the terror camps in Transnistria. Both Roma and Jews were deported to Transnistria between 1942 and 1944. Even today, in Romania, people are unaware of this history. Instead of saying the genocide in Transnistria, they refer it to as the deportation in Transnistria. I want to be clear. What we experienced was a genocide, persecution, mass murder, and injustice. Simply because we were born Roma or Jewish. Up to 5,000 Roma were deported and more than 11,000 were killed. I was born in March 1934, as my mother told me. The authorities did not register my birth until 1938, when they gathered our names to prepare for the deportations. I was only 8 years old when my family and I were forced into trains to Transnistria. I will never forget those moments when we were guaranteed into the trains. Many people died on the trains before we even arrived. Those who reached the concentration camps suffered even more. Forced labor, starvation, disease, and constant terror, typhus. We were sent to camps like Tiraspol, Koronica, and Odessa. Death was a daily presence. I saw my mother, my sister, and 2 of my brothers die. Only a few of us returned home, and when we did, we had nothing left. No one helped us return or recover. No one acknowledged our suffering, our homes, our land, our dignity. Everything was taken from us. And nothing was given back. For decades, we suffered. Under communism, we were not recognized as Holocaust survivors. Under communism and after communism, Roma continued to suffer violence and injustice. In 1992, many Roma from Romania especially from Craiova, hoped for some hope in Germany. When we arrived there, we encountered hate and racism. In Rostock, we were attacked. We even lived through a pogrom. Many of us were survivors from Transnistria. The German government did not offer us protection. Instead, it deported us back to Romania. Today, I stand before you as a Holocaust survivor, but also as a witness to the ongoing suffering of my people. Many Roma communities still face poverty, racism, and violence. I'm here today because the suffering of every Roma was very important. This is an important step toward recognizing our history. Transnistria remains a forgotten chapter of Holocaust history. I call on Romania and all countries to include the history of the Roma as a part of our common national history in national museums. Allow me to say to all the young people listening to my story, I ask you to learn about your history. I hope you will build a world without racism. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muclescu. We're deeply grateful for you for your tireless efforts to have your history recognized, your fight against racism, and to bring an end to anti-Roma prejudice. It is now my honor to invite Ms. Marianne Muller to address us. Ms. Muller has flown from Israel to be with us, and she is supported by her daughters, Nicolette Muller Chuya and Ms. Karen Muller-Boimel, and her sons, Mr. Adir Miller and Mr. Jonathan Miller. Thank you very much, Ms. Miller, for your courage and strength, and to continue sharing your story.
Good morning. My name is Marianne Miller, and I am a Holocaust survivor. I was born into the Holocaust. I was just a baby, but I can still say in first name, I have been there. It didn't happen in the dark Middle Ages. It happened only 80 years ago. 1944, Budapest. A long march of mothers with their babies in their arms in a freezing cold night in December. My mother is in this march with me in her arms. And then she did something with a sudden movement. She tore off the yellow star, ran out of the line, and found a shelter under a gate. She saw that nobody had seen her, but a young Nazi ran after her, pointed his gun at her chest. Did you run out of the line? This march was meant to be the railway station, destination Auschwitz. Now I am going to kill your baby, and then you will join the line again. There was no point to ask for mercy. These people didn't have one cell of humanity left in them. All my mother had was a gold wedding ring, so thin it had no value. They didn't take it away from her. She said, with fire in her eyes, like she wanted to hypnotize this young Nazi, "Look, you can have all the jewelry in the world, diamond, gold, silver, but you murder people and take them away. Take this ring. It is shining. It is for the life of a mother and her baby. Take it. You will need it. The day of judgment will come. You will be asked, where did you get all this jewelry, diamond, gold, and you will have to answer, I murdered people and took them away. Take this ring. It is shining. There is no blood on this ring, only blessing. Take it. Nobody saw me, only you. Take the thing." The young Nazi was turning the ring around his fingers. Maybe that in that moment, he was attached to the one cell of humanity and mercy. And in that moment, my mother ran away with me in the darkness. He didn't run after her. She went through many, many things like that. I was crying when I was afraid of the bombs flying around me. And then she told me, don't be afraid of bombs. Bombs have soul. They don't kill children. And in these days, it was true. Bombs had more soul than human beings. One day, this is the only episode I just would say, she had to cross a bridge. And if a single woman crossed this bridge, she would be asked for certificates, which she didn't have. This would mean to kill her right on the spot. She was standing 3 hours to wait to look for good eyes. 3 hours she had to wait. And then she met someone she thought she found the good eyes. She asked him, may I put my arm in yours and cross the bridge with my child? And the man with the good eyes said, put your arm in mine. They crossed the bridge. She said, thank you. And he told her, take care of yourself. All our lives, we always are looking for good eyes. There should be more than one person. My father was in the famous, most horrible camp, hunger camp. It's called Bergen-Belsen. People were starved to death just because that they were Jewish. He got one slice of bread for a week like everybody else. He was a sportsman. He was a fencing champion. So he had the physical and mental power and discipline to cut the one slice of bread to 7 cubes. He ate 1 cube every day, washed himself in the snow and the frozen ice just to stay alive. On Liberation Day, he weighed 36 kilos. This is the weight of a child. Most of my family, my mother's sister, my father's only sister, my little nephew, little cousin, 13 years old, that if he had lived, he would have been a worldwide known poet, were all shot into the Danube. My mother always said, the Danube, everybody says so nice and blue. For me, it is red. From the blood of my sister. I lost my husband 2 months ago. He was also a holiday victim. He was born in Czechoslovakia. He and his parents were taken to the camp of Theresienstadt. He was there from the age of 4 till the age of 8. His father was taken to Auschwitz. His baby brother was born there. And when liberation came, 10,000 children were in Theresienstadt. From the 10,000, only 100 stayed alive. 2 of them were my husband and his brother. And at the age of 8, he had to become a little father to his brother. Last April, I was deeply honored. I was chosen to open the March of Life in Auschwitz. I went there with my children and grandchildren. I was deeply shocked. I couldn't sleep for weeks to see there the mountains of shoes, the mountains of human hair, the mountains of eyeglasses. 6 million people. I don't need to say one more word, no story, just 6 million people that were brutally tortured, beaten up, killed, just because they were Jewish, just because they were born Jewish. All of them and each of them had a life. Each of them had a family. Each of them had a story. Each of them had a dream. I couldn't sleep for weeks because I never forgot these pictures of the mountains of shoes, eyeglasses, of hair that became from people. I came here accompanied by my 4 children and my grandchildren. For me, this is my personal answer to Hitler. I lost my father at relevantly young because he got an illness in Bergen-Belsen, but my mother stayed with us. The heroine helped me to raise my children, and when she died, we were all around her, and I felt that God sent a beautiful carriage in the colors of pink, white, blue, and silver, with 6 white horses that they took her to heaven. And she's there to guard us because mothers don't leave. They just change address. And I want to say a message to the world. I came here with a long flight to represent the 6 million people that they don't have a voice and don't have a life. And also, I may represent a very weak sector of society. They are getting sicker, more ill, more weak. The remaining Holocaust survivors that are dying out day by day. And I again say, the most horrible thing in the Holocaust is that it didn't happen in the Middle Ages, but happened only 8 years ago, and people are still alive to tell and witness. The story was true. This unbelievable story was true. I have a message, and that's why I came. I want to tell the world that God has created mankind not to hate, but to love. Rule the world with love and not hate. Hatred is terrible. And find the goodness, find the good eyes. You can always change the world for a better one. And I want to ask forgiveness of the 6 million that can't be here, and remember all of us that this thing should never, never happen again, because God didn't create us to hate. Mankind has been given only a few decades, a few times 10 years to live. Don't waste it on hatred. Help other people, if I may say to the world with good eyes and good heart, who have heart and children, help us to bring our hostages back. Please do it. And I want to thank from the bottom of my heart, from my deepest thanks, to the ambassador to the United States, our ambassador, Mr. Donny Danon, that made all the efforts of my being here possible today. And I want to express all my love and gratitude to our beloved president, Mr. Isaac Herzog, and the First Lady, his wonderful wife. And may I say a personal note. Personal note, my mother helped to raise my children, and I loved her so much that she lived as a queen, not economically, but in the love she got. My son has become a very famous comedian and film producer. And just now, he made a movie to the memory of his grandmother, and the movie is called The Ring, also the memory to remind the people the Holocaust. And the end of the movie ends, he as a child embraces his grandmother, and it says, to the memory of my beloved grandmother, Mrs. Violetta Nobel. And here I want to tell you, thanks to the United Nations and its secretary, thanks to you that you remember and keep this day so holy every day, every year, the liberation of the camp of Auschwitz, November 27. Thank you so much to be here and to listen to me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mueller, for your courage and your strength and for that most moving personal account of your story. I would now like to call on Ms. Feldschuh to introduce the Lebensmelodien Project Ensemble's presentation of Old Wisnitzer Kniegion of Ya Ribbon Olam. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mialesco and Ms. Mueller, you pierce our hearts. God bless you. Whew, Mamma mia. Old Vizhnitzer nigun yara bon olam. Nisan Just. I'm going to wait. Let me wait till she's seated. Thank you, Toda Rabba. Good. Nisan Just was born in 1876 in the town of Zhikov, Poland. He had a fine singing voice and would lead the Sabbath and the Jewish holiday prayers in the town's synagogue. The story is told that a Hasidic rabbi of Vizhnitz, he was Ukrainian, Rabbi Yisrael Hager, on a visit to Zhikov, heard Just in the synagogue, and he was extremely impressed by him, to the point that Rabbi Hagar invited Just to move to his synagogue in Transylvania. Just did, and he quickly became the head cantor in that synagogue. As such, Just began to write his own liturgical compositions. So moving were his pieces that Jews from other towns would come especially to hear the nigunim sung at that synagogue. With the Nazi occupation of Hungary, Nisan Just, like all the Jews of his town, was interred in a ghetto, and in 1944 was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where he was murdered. According to survivors, however, the nigunim of the ghetto were sung in that camp, lighting up the Jewish soul, if only for a moment, in the midst of all the unspeakable horror.
you for that stirring piece. We are deeply mindful of the historic significance of the date of 27 January 1945. Soviet forces liberated the camps of Auschwitz, Auschwitz II-Birkenau, and Buna Monowitz. The events of the day continue to resonate over time. Marking this significant date, we invite His Excellency Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia, Permanent Representative of the Russian Federation, to deliver brief remarks.
I will speak in Russian. Those of you who need translation, please use your earphones. The English channel is one. Уважаемые,
Dear former prisoners of concentration camps and all of the Holocaust survivors, President of the State of Israel, Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered here today to commemorate, to remember one of the most horrific crimes committed in the history of mankind, the Holocaust, the extermination of Jews on the basis of their ethnicity was the result of the Nazi ideology of racial superiority. And this ideology stems from inhuman colonial practices and then takes them to terrifying completion. We commemorate the victims of the Holocaust today on the 27th of January, on the day when the largest death camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Oświęcim in Polish, where at least 1 million Jews had been exterminated, was liberated by the Red Army, which played a key role in stopping the relentless machine of human annihilation. In this death camp, prisoners, including newborn children, were exterminated in gas chambers using the Cyclone B gas, the gas which had first been tested on Soviet prisoners of war. In the Auschwitz camp system, however, people were not only slaughtered, they were commercially exploited, and not just by the Nazis, who extracted gold teeth and cut the hair of their victims, but also by large German companies. For example, Auschwitz III camp was essentially a branch of the chemical conglomerate IG Farben. No aviation or artillery was used to liberate the camp. 231 Soviet rank-and-file soldiers and officers gave their lives for the freedom of the Auschwitz prisoners. The soldiers were accompanied by Soviet doctors who had experience in treating the emaciated by hunger people from the besieged Leningrad. And it is today, on the 27th of January, is the date when you remember the 81st anniversary of the lifting of the siege of Leningrad. More than 4,500 prisoners of Auschwitz in the very first hours and days of their liberation were given medical assistance, and this included Otto Frank, the father of the famous Anne Frank. A cavalier of 2 orders of the Red Star and a medical service sergeant, Maria Karakosova, recalled that the eyes of the emaciated people with blackened skin shone with happiness because they saw that their liberation had come and they were finally free. A platoon commander, Lieutenant Vasily Gromadsky, recalled that the liberated prisoners cried and hugged us and told us that millions of people had been exterminated here. He wrote, "I still recall that they told us that 12 railroad cars filled with baby strollers alone were sent from Auschwitz, and they showed us the crematorium chimney and said that people were burned there." Eva Moses Kor, a Romanian Jew who survived experiments in the Auschwitz concentration camp, in her autobiographical book called Surviving the Angels of Death described the Liberation Days as follows. On the morning of January 27th, for the first time in many weeks, it was completely silent. We hoped that this was the liberation we had hoped for, but we had no idea what it would mean for us. Then, at around 3 or 4 p.m., a woman ran out to the front of the barracks and started screaming, "We're free! We're free! We're free!" We are free? What did she mean? We wondered. We all ran to the doorway, and I stood at the top step, and huge snowflakes were falling on me. I could not see anything beyond a few feet in front of me. The snow had fallen all day, and the dirty gray of Auschwitz was now covered in a white blanket of snow. "Don't you see something's coming?" asked one of the older girls. And then I saw them. About 20 feet away from us, we saw Soviet soldiers emerging through the snow, approaching us in almost completely snow-covered uniforms. And they silently waded through the crispy snow towards us. As they came closer, they looked at us like they were smiling. Were those smirks or smiles? I tried to find out, then peered closely and saw that they were indeed smiling with real smiles. Joy and hope then welled up inside of us. We were finally safe and we were free. Crying and laughing, we ran up to the soldiers, hugging them. A shout rose from the crowd. "We are free! We are free!" There was laughter mixed in with tears, and this was a sound of celebration. The soldiers themselves could not hold back the tears and laughter and hold us back. They gave us cookies and chocolates, and these were the most delicious cookies and chocolates in the world, and that became for us the taste of freedom. End of quote. And I am certain that children who took the sweets then from the hands of Soviet soldiers could not imagine that a few decades later the decisive role of the Soviet army in the victory over Nazism and in putting an end to the Holocaust would start to be questioned. That the country where Auschwitz was located would demolish monuments to the soldiers and officers of the Red Army who liberated that country and the death camp. That representatives of the state that brought liberation from the Nazi death machine would not today be invited to the commemoration events in the former camp. Auschwitz prisoners could not have imagined either that Nazism and neo-Nazism would begin to rear its ugly head in many parts of the world, as was pointed out correctly so by the Secretary General of the United Nations. Nor could they see that the days of liberation from Nazi troops would be declared days of mourning, that monuments and streets would appear named after Waffen SS veterans, that neo-Nazi marches would be held, and that the veterans of the anti-Hitler coalition would be forbidden to wear their decoration and insignia. And this is why we annually submit to the General Assembly a resolution on combating the glorification of Nazism. The memory of all the victims of Nazism, including Jews, at least half of whom were citizens of the Soviet Union, is sacred for us. And this is why we are convinced that it is our common duty to preserve the truth about the Holocaust and other crimes of the Nazis and their accomplices, particularly the genocide of the peoples of the Soviet Union. This morning, we sent a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations, which we requested be circulated as a document of the United Nations General Assembly and Security Council. In the attachment to this letter, one can find an extensive compilation of evidence of recent acts of glorification of Nazis and their accomplices. We must not forget that without the great victory of 1945, there would be neither the United Nations nor the world as we know it. It was the countries of the anti-Hitler coalition that took up the name of the United Nations, and no one has the right to consign this fact to oblivion. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Nebensia. Dear friends, the Holocaust devastated communities across Europe and had a profound impact. We now call on His Excellency Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, to deliver remarks.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I stand here before you as the ambassador of the European Union that rose from the ashes of the Second World War and of the biggest human rights violation in recent history, the Holocaust. By choosing to unite at the heels of that horror, we pledged above all else never to allow ourselves either the desire or the means to ever again perpetrate such atrocities. In memory of the victims, we joined forces to make such moral and material self-destruction unthinkable in Europe or anywhere else in the world. To turn an unprecedented labor of hate into a labor of love. Even today, 80 years to the day since its liberation, the name Auschwitz-Birkenau is shorthand for one of the darkest periods of human history, a monument to that hate. On behalf of the European Union, I honor the survivors we heard from today. You are our connection with all the lives, the loves, the dreams interrupted there, of all those whose bodies may have perished in the Holocaust, but whose memory is everlasting. Jewish people in the millions, but also all others vilified and murdered simply because of who they were or what they believed in. Friends, as wartime memories fade and first-hand testimony becomes ever more precious, we are all called upon to be guardians of that memory. This means standing together against Holocaust denial, disinformation, conspiracy theories, distorted versions of history, including modern history, and above all, the repeat of such violence, such aggression, such inhumanity, such lawlessness in our world today. It also means working every day to keep fighting anti-Semitism and all other types of insidious discrimination in our own societies and around the world. This collective memory should be a spur to action to defend those universal human rights in their entirety as our shared inheritance. Because one big lesson of the Holocaust is that silence is complicity, and it is also dangerous for each and every one of us. We are all expendable when it comes to the whims of authoritarianism. In the words of Pastor Niemöller, then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. The great Nelson Mandela put it differently, but no less powerfully. No one is born hating one another, he said. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, then they can be taught to love. We are proud to be here with you today to keep this memory alive. And let us hope that commemorations like this one can teach us day by day more and more how to love. Or, as Ms. Mueller put it, maybe teach us how to recognize and maybe to become ourselves those kind eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Lambrinidis. And I now call on Mr. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yang, President of the 79th Session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Isaac Herzog, President of the State of Israel, Miss Ginger Lane and her daughter, Ms. Beth Lane, Ms. Marianne Muller and her son, Jonathan Muller, as well as Mr. Dumitru Muclescu and his great niece, Isabel Tiber Reich, to lead us in the lighting of the memorial candles. As the memorial candles are lit, we invite you to light the small candle that you have in front of you. Thank you. Thank you. I will now ask our guests to kindly make their way back to their seats. And while you're doing that, I would like to welcome Cantor Eric S. Freeman from the Yeshiva University, who will recite the memorial prayers. And I ask all of you who can to please stand and rise. Thank you.
El Molei Rachamim Shochein Pameromim Hamitzei Minuchanechana Al-Kanefei Al-Kanefei Shekhinah B'malos Kedoshim U'teharim Kizahar Harakia Mazirim Lenishmos Sheishes Millionei HaYehudim Chalelei HaShoah B'Europa Acheinu Yachiuseinu Anashim Nashim V'Taf Shehomsu V'Shenergu V'Shenishchatu V'Shenitbiu V'Shenechneku V'Shenisrafu Chayim Al Kiddushas Hashem Auschwitz, Birkenau, Majdanek, Treblinka, Sobibor, Ufshar, Machanos Amoves, Machanos Harikuz, Veagetos Beropa, Al Yedei Atzorim, Hanatsim, Biozrehem, Pavur, Pavur, Shekol Amayehudi, Miumosolam, Misbalelim, Lilui, Nishmosehem, Began Eden, Tei Menuchasom, Lochein Balarachamim, Yastireim, Besezerkin of the Olamim, Vitzror Achayim, Es Nishmosehem, Adonai, Hu Nachalosom, V'yonuchu v'shalom al mishkevosehem. V'nomar Amen. Ani mamin, ani mamin, ani mamin, be'emunah shelema, b'vias HaMoshiach, b'vias HaMoshiach, ani mamin, v'af al pi she'yismamea, im kol ze hachakelo, im kol ze hachakelo, b'chol yom sheyavo.
Thank you, Cantor Freeman. And as we come to the close of our observance today, we turn one last time to Ms. Feldschuh, the Lebensmelodien Project Ensemble for the last dance.
The Last Dance by Shmuel Borenstein. It is my final stop, Auschwitz. Here, there are no more options. Here, all stratagems end. Here, the reckoning begins. Here, all is taken away. And here, I stand in an open field, robbed, despoiled, degraded, with nothing left in this world. May the earth of Auschwitz open and swallow me alive, I pray in my heart. And with a sudden gust, a storm erupts deep inside my soul, jolting me out of my torpor, and I begin to dance. I dance naked. I dance from within my shame. I dance silently. Only my legs are lifted. My hands, they stretch. They stretch toward the heavens. My eyes are closed, but in my mind, an inner flame is kindled. Believe me, this is not some made-up story. It was a dance that may have gone unnoticed in the mad chaos of Auschwitz. It was a dance of someone who had nothing left and was therefore completely filled with the passion of sublime communion with the divine. I cry out as if terrified by the sound of my own voice, so then I suddenly go silent, and with wide and blazing eyes that look like embers bursting into flame beneath the mounds of ash, I realize it is my eyes that give away my secret, that I, Shmuel, I am the dancer.
Thank you very much, Nur Ben Shalom, the Lebensmelodien Ensemble, Ms. Feldschuh, for bringing back to life and into memory the voices and the sounds that the Nazis sought to silence forever. Thank you. Friends, much has changed in the last 80 years, and much sadly remains the same. We have not yet defeated prejudice, while hatred and war continue to scar and maim and kill. And we stand in the shadow of ongoing suffering, death, and destruction across the globe. So today and every day, we ask ourselves, and particularly after a ceremony like this, what can we do? What remains is the imperative to remember the history, to keep the voices and the memories alive. And we hope that we have done that with dignity in this ceremony. We will end our observance with a pledge to those who were murdered and those who survived to continue to tell the history. We will never forget. We will remember, and we will work together and do all that we can to build a world that is just, in which all live in peace and in dignity. Thank you for joining us today. May I please kindly ask you to remain in your seats until the dignitaries and the survivors have left the hall. Thank you so much for joining us, and be well.